friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I am so excited about today's episode. So, today is our 2-year anniversary. So, this is a bonus episode for you. And also, we have our very first guests on the rabbit hole. So, I would like to introduce Leslie and Stephen Shaw. Leslie Shaw has been working as a journalist for the past 18 years. She is also a trained artist with a bachelor's degree in experimental animation and ancient art history. Stephen is a retired acupuncturist, Tai Chi instructor, and orchestral musician. So they both have a lifelong love affair with the UFO subject. They are both UFO witnesses, which is super cool. And Stephen and his very psychic family have been victims of the alien abduction phenomenon for at least 3 generations. So they have spent the last 20 years researching their UFO book, who they are, and what they're up to. And if you're interested in reading their book, I am linking that in the show notes as well as their Instagram if you want to get in touch with them. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi,
Thanks
thank
for the
you.
intro.
I am
Thanks
so
so much
excited
for
to
having
have you
us.
guys here to talk about your UFO journey. So, Leslie, I know you started, or both of you, excuse me, started doing the research, but when you first saw your UFO encounter, so I want you to talk about that, and then Stephen, I want you to kind of go all the way back to the beginning and talk about kind of where it all started.
Okay, my first UFO sighting was in 2005, January of 2005. And before that, I was believing all the things Stephen was telling me, but I only believed him maybe 98%. And then I finally saw my first UFO, and then I believed him 100% after that. Seeing is believing. We were traveling west on Highway 62 in Joshua Tree towards Yucca Valley, where our home, and we saw a bright white light up in the sky, and it didn't have running lights like airplanes. I thought it was a plane at first going into Palm Springs, but the more I looked at it, the less like a plane. Just a big white round light in the sky with no running lights. And it got brighter and brighter. And then suddenly it took off over the northern horizon and was gone in about a quarter of a second. If I were going to guess the speed, I would have said multiple thousands of miles per hour, maybe 20,000 miles an hour. And it took off at speed without ramping up to speed, just instantly at that speed. Would have killed any human pilot that was inside of it. Or obviously the technology, whatever their technology is, they're able to negate that effect, the gravity effect, and the inertia effect. So then Stephen saw 3 UFOs before me, and that was his fourth and my first. And but then his phenomenon actually started quite young.
Yes, my phenomena started. Well, if we want to go into um, contacts with entities, that goes back to the age of 3. When I was 3, living in Woodland Hills, which is a suburb of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, sorry, just getting over a cold.
No, that's okay.
Would be commonly visited by this invisible entity that would playfully jump on my chest and my stomach when I was in the middle of the night, and I didn't feel, scared by it. It was just kind of like playing with me. Then by about the age of 10, it was at 9:30 at night, again in the wintertime. I was looking outside the front door, and I saw this very large orange globe that was just kind of hovering there in the eastern sky, and then it started going from south to north in a vertical, in a horizontal manner, and it was certainly not a plane. I checked, I looked many times, and in fact, the next day I called Griffith Park Observatory, and they said, well, our telescopes aren't aimed in that direction, so we didn't hear any reports. At that time, there were actually reports of UFOs fairly commonly in the Woodland Hills area. Some famous ones going back to the 70s at a drive-in movie theater. So fast forwarding, around about a little bit before that, though, I'd say back when I was about 9, I was awakened by this strange sound in the living room. I could hear it was in the living room of the house. I was sleeping in a bunk bed. I was on top of the bunk bed, and it wasn't our dog. I knew the sound of our dog, so I got out of the bed quietly, and went walking down the hallway, and my heart was pounding, and I was in adrenal mode. I was definitely awake, and I was literally scared. I had no idea what I was going to see. And just before I turned the corner into the living room, I just go blank. Next thing I know, a few hours later, I'm back awake in my bunk bed somehow, and with no memory of what had happened.
Did you know that it wasn't a
Now,
dream?
well, it was not a dream because I was in adrenal mode. I
Because
was,
he was frightened
I,
and
I,
heart pounding.
I spent 6 years in the military myself as in the Seabees, and I can tell you for a fact that when your heart's pounding and your blood pressure is up and you're scared, you're
Right.
not in a dream.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean there's a big difference.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I'm just
so
verifying all the facts here.
yes, details are important.
Yes.
Always yes.
And the family, they've had dozens and dozens of these experiences where they'll see something weird and then black out. And they wake up 3 hours later in bed or
Well, my,
a couple
family
hours, you know.
my family came from England, both England and Germany, and also actually Scotland. And the Rowe side of the family and the Newman side of the family, they were spiritualists and they did automatic writing and they were very sensitive. I've read things my mom wrote, and actually my mom knew when her mother, her father, and her uncle Clifford died, who were living in England. She
Wow.
knew she was contacted via automatic writing back, in the 60s. And I remember she picked me up from school one day when I was 9, and she was crying. I said, "Mommy, what's wrong?" Says, "My mom just died." "Well, did you get a call?" I said, "No. I was contacted by automatic writing, and I wrote it down." And sure enough, she knew before we even got contacted from England that,
Yeah,
Wow.
official word arrived
yeah.
later.
So this was see, I grew up with this as being a common thing. As a child, we had a family spirit guide, which now I think is really more like an alien connection than a family spirit guide called Old Glegley. And Old Glegley would manifest and show himself to people at certain times, both to be helpful and we think also now sometimes to maybe take genetic material or to have different purposes. But whatever it is, this entity, the Shaw and the Rowe line was important to them, for generations. I've had multiple missing time. So did my brother.
Yes, his brother one
So
time saw a gray alien in his room. He was 16 at this time, and he saw a gray
a
alien in
totally
his
different
room.
house.
Yeah. The phenomenon has followed the family to all different houses in different locations. It's not like a haunting that tends to stay in the same
Different
place.
continents too.
Right.
But yeah, and different continents. But at 16, Philip, his brother, saw a gray alien in his room and then blacked out. And so that right there told us what the phenomenon is that we're dealing with is the the thing where people go blank and then forget for hours.
Yeah.
That's the signature of the alien abduction phenomenon.
Uh, Actually, I wanted to cover. You're interested in my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
The most telling, as far as what's been going on, happened with my dad, my sister, and myself all living in the same house, experiencing both together and separately in a week's period of time in 1979, January 1979, when I was 18. Uh, the first, sorry, I even took a cough drop. So, anyway, the first night, apparently my dad's closet doors in his bedroom opened and closed on him, and he told me at breakfast time, said, "Stephen, my closet doors opened and closed on me," and I thought, "Oh, Dad, that was a dream. You're just probably just imagining it or something." I didn't really take it seriously. Then the next night, my dad came to get me out of my room at about 9:30 at night. He said, "Stephen, I must be hearing things." And I said, "Okay." So I went to the living room, and he said, "I'm hearing a silver bell being rung inside the wall right next to the chimney, inside the 2x4 wall." And so I said, "Okay." So I said, "Yeah, that's a silver bell. What the heck?" And we were just trying to look up the chimney, up the flue. Said, "Okay." So we got my sister out of her room. So my sister came out, and she said, "Yeah, that's a silver bell." And we banged on the wall, tried to maybe it's an animal or trying to make up some logical reason for it. So and it went over a good 10 or 15 minutes, and then it disappeared. Now the next day, we called my mom. My mom was living in a house that we were building because we were cabinet makers and contractors, so we're doing all the work ourselves. A house 350 miles away in Sonora, California. and she maintained that the phone rang about 9:30 at night. Now my brother was living with my mom because he was going to school up there. So my brother says the phone never rang, but my mom said she heard a bell and she picked up the phone, and there was some person on the other line saying, "I'm the invisible on Beachy," or something like that. And so my brother said, yes, she picked up the phone, but the phone never rang. So this happened 350 miles away. There were 5 people involved, but 2 were in a different location and 3 were in the one location
At the same
at
time
the
it was
same time.
happening.
So that was weird. So
Right.
the
That's
next
yeah.
night I
That's
went
strange.
to sleep. Yeah. So the next night I went to sleep in my regular bedroom, but this time not on the top bunk, but on the bottom. And I was awakened in the middle of the night by this like a whizzing sound in the air, three whizzes. And I just turned over and I looked down the hallway because there was still light on the kitchen, so I could see that. Oh, I thought maybe it was a bug or something like that, some type of big wasp. And there's nothing there, so tried to go back to sleep, rolled on my left side, and then the bed was pushed from the base of the bed, 2 distinct shoves, like push, push. Not not hard, but I thought, well, we live in Southern California, maybe it's an earthquake. So I continued to try to go back to sleep, and then it pushed twice again, stronger than the first time. Then the third time it was even stronger. Then the fourth thing that happened. By this time I'm getting annoyed and scared. Then I got a tap, like somebody's with their index finger went tap, tap, tap 3 times on my right deltoid, on my shoulder. And at this point I was really scared and also annoyed. So I rolled over and said, "What?" And I looked straight into what I expected to see, an entity, and then I just black out. I can't remember whether I told my dad or whether I got up. I have no clue. So by the next night, I was afraid to sleep in that room. I thought, well, I don't want to be going through that again. I didn't get, I felt tired and I felt scared, so I'm gonna sleep in the living room tonight. So I went to sleep in my work clothes that had coins and nails in it from, I was a cabinet maker at the time. So, anyways, I woke about 5:30 in the morning. It was dark, and I looked at my piano because I'm a pianist and a musician. I thought, well, what kind of music I was going to play that day, and I listened to the fountain in the other room. So I was awake. I was, totally aware of my circumstances and my environment. And from behind me, from the front door, which is about 25 feet behind my head, this blue-white tall entity, about 6 to 7 feet tall, just moved within about a second to 2 seconds, like it was floating, walking very quickly. And it stopped by my right hand side, and the whole room was filled with this blue white light. And it paralyzed the whole right side of my body, like taking a knife down from the head down to the toes. The whole right side of my body, I could not move. It wasn't scary, but I was neutralized. I could not move it. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm going to see this family spirit guide. I'm going to see Old Glegley that people have told me about. But the other part of my brain was saying, dude, you can't move. You are neutralized. What is you have no control. And so I'm like half like wow, I'm going to see Old Glegley, and the other half says, you have no control. So it bent down towards my right side of my body and it whispered in my ear, "Hi, Steve," in a whisper that I couldn't tell was whether it was male or female. And I thought, oh man, and it lasted for, I don't know how long, 5 seconds or half a minute, and then it left. And then to this day, I originally thought that I went and told my dad, but I don't think I did. I don't have any clear memory about what happened. What I can do tell you is 6 hours later, it was about 11:30 in the morning, getting ready for lunch. I reached into my right hand side pocket and pulled out the money that I had, which were mostly coins at the time, just American coins, and all the coins were magnetized. People say that's not possible. Well, I can tell you for a fact. My dad and I saw it. We could pick up the coins with the coins. It didn't matter, okay? They
And
were
that's not supposed to be
not
possible
supposed to be possible.
because, American coins are designed so that they can go into machines, like Pepsi machines and
And so
whatever.
the only mistake we made was that we were working, and I didn't think at the time to say, oh, let's get a camera and take a picture. But anyway, so the next night was the last night, and my dad was awakened by this intense blue white light that was right outside of my bedroom door. It was like my bedroom was filled with blue white light, and my dad was going to get up and said, "What the heck is this?" And he heard this voice, and it said, "Say, relax, Jeffrey. Go back to sleep. Everything's fine. Don't worry." And then he went back to sleep. So
And he has no memory of this at all.
yeah,
So,
and myself, I have no memory about any entity or blue white light that particular time. They blanked me. I was blanked completely of that interaction.
and we've attempted to break through this memory block of Stevens with hypnosis, but so far we have failed. We haven't been able to break through the block.
Not so far.
It's well placed, and we're actually trying to find. We live kind of remotely, and it's not easy to find service providers out here. So we're still looking for a hypnotist that can actually break through this block.
Somebody who's got experience, and somebody that actually. The only time I've ever truly been hypnotized was on my 19th birthday, July 28th, 1979. I went to the Pat Collins Hip Hypnotist show that was really popular in Los Angeles, Sunset and Doheny. And I went there with my girlfriend at the time, and I was actually the last guy to get on the stage, and she hypnotized all 9 of us at once, and I wouldn't have believed it was possible, but at least at that point in my life, it was like this veil came over this curtain came down over my eyes, and every single person on that stage was hypnotized. We did the.
So we know he can be hypnotized, but
at least when I was 19, I could be.
yeah, but so far, like I say, we've failed in that. And so after I saw my first UFO, we started thinking more seriously about writing a book about it and our various theories about it. And as we started doing our research, almost 20 years ago,
Yeah.
we first noticed that UFO theories and UFO facts were not lining up. And we noticed this again and again. And one reason one way they don't line up is that they're supposedly coming from distant star systems or other planets, and but they're here, seen 10,000 times per year, every year, going back hundreds of years and possibly thousands of years. So that belies the idea that they're coming from a distant star system, because they wouldn't be here so often. And then also the fact that we think only the reporting versus actual sightings is only at about 10%. So really that 10,000 number is 100,000. They're
Right.
seen 100,000 times per year
Yeah, and
all
that
over the
and
world.
that and that data goes back to guys like Graves and Grush and Fravor, who are 2 of them were pilots with the United States Navy, and they're saying that every time they go out on missions, every single time, UFOs are monitoring and dogging the missions. They said that it's really the reporting's only about 5 or 10%.
Yeah.
Well, and our
so it
military
could be
sees them all the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we were having
Yes.
this conversation that they see them constantly, but they just don't say anything anymore.
Right. They don't report it to the public. And, they leaked Elizondo, who was head of the ATIP department in 2017. He leaked those 3 videos to the New York Times. But before that, we had almost no knowledge of what was going on with our military. And it makes sense that they're dogging our military everywhere they go, because we think they're quite alarmed at our having nuclear weapons. We've seen a lot of evidence that they are interested in our nukes. UFOs are seen outside our nuclear bases, outside our research facilities, outside the squadrons that deliver nuclear weapons. And the Roswell incident is famous. The 509 Airborne was out of Roswell's base there, and that's the ones that delivered the bomb originally for the Hiroshima bomb. So they're definitely concerned. It's an obvious concern over our nuclear weapons.
They've also shown that they can deactivate our ICBMs one at a time, like the Malmstrom incident
during
in
the Malmstrom
Montana.
incident. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they deactivated 10 that were on separate systems just in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
So we know that they're doing this. They did it in Great Britain and Russia, And so they've shown that, listen, we can deactivate these things, but I think they really are concerned. They have legitimate, real concerns for us, like destroying the planet.
And another thing I noticed wasn't lining up with the facts was UFO theory at the time was that aliens are just interested in the human race, and that's why they're abducting people. They're just abducting people to get a sample, genetic sample, and just out of scientific interest. But we've quickly discovered that that is not what is happening with that phenomenon. Instead of taking a cross section of humanity, the abduction phenomenon is almost entirely a Caucasian phenomenon.
A high percentage.
Yes, like 95% ish.
Wow.
That of those abductees are of Caucasian descent.
And we are 16% of the world's population.
Yeah, we don't.
So
We only make up a small percentage of the population, and yet that's their primary interest. And when they find a DNA strand that they like, they tend to prey on that person again and again and again and again through their lives.
Like
And
Stephen's
it's not,
family.
they're not taking.
family, yes. So
Yeah.
then their children and then their grandchildren.
Right. They'll
It's
start taking
it's a
them.
generational thing.
And that's what I think happened is with Stephen's family too. And they also are particularly interested in Basque persons and people with Rh negative blood types are make up a higher percentage of the abduction
And green
phenomenon.
eyes.
And then there's the we think that I relate it more like it seems more like they're harvesting a product than they are just taking genetic scientific samples. The way I make the analogy in the book is that it's like a cow and his farmer and his cow. The farmer abducts the cow every morning and takes it into the barn and removes the milk out of it, and then it puts it back out into the field so it can generate some more milk, and then takes it again later and takes the milk out of it. It seems to me that that's what they're doing, except in our case they're harvesting genetic material like eggs and sperm out of human beings and blood.
Yes.
It's also a blood thing. And then that we found a lot of correlations between the alien abduction phenomenon and the vampire myths and the incubus and succubus myths, in that, they come at night,
Mm-hmm.
they are very pale,
They're powerful.
they're powerful, they have the ability to paralyze their victims, and they always take DNA in the form of blood.
Yeah, and they can change form too.
And then the succubus incubus phenomenon, that seems to me to correlate with their alien breeding program, their human hybrid alien breeding program. The succubus, and the incubus, it's a sexual. They come and have sex with their paralyzed victims, and the resulting pregnancy doesn't come to term, and they just give birth to air. It's been recorded in medieval times.
Yes, in ancient times. Yes.
It's almost
Wow.
like they just give birth to air, and we think from Professor Jacobs is where we got a lot of our alien abduction data. He's a professor who did hypnotic regressions for his career. In his career, he did 10,000 of them, so he has a large data pool. And of that 10,000, 1,100 are women who claim that they were taken and impregnated, and then taken again 4 months later, and the fetus is stolen. And then they're taken again years later, sometimes, and introduced to their alien hybrid children. And the children the eyes are too large, frequently the chins are pointy, the cheekbones are too pointy. But they look more human than the aliens do, the gray aliens.
And because of advancements in medicine, a lot of these women have had ultrasounds to show, yes, I am pregnant. Their doctor said, yes, you were pregnant. Your fetus was about 5 centimeters, which is about the size of a baseball.
About 4 months.
And they go in and says, I lost my baby. And they do another ultrasound. It looks as if they were never pregnant in the first place.
It's like they vacuum out the womb, and there's
So
no genetic material.
It wasn't a miscarriage, in other words.
Right.
The doctor says, this is confusing. It looks like you were never pregnant. And some of these women, it happens multiple times.
Yeah, their children just stolen away.
Yeah.
Pregnancy
gosh.
after pregnancy after pregnancy. So it's like they're find as soon as they find a genetic strain that they like, that's what they're going to prey upon. And we don't really fully understand their criteria, except just looking at the data. Like we said before, it's
Yes.
almost entirely a Caucasian phenomenon.
That's crazy. So obviously there are other people that are being taken, like of other nationalities or other like ethnicities, excuse me.
Yes.
But like mostly that's okay. Um
Yet it seems to be that I think that data came mostly from statistics that were found in the United States and Northern America. Now, as far as worldwide, it might be a little bit less, but it seems to be at least primarily it is a Caucasian phenomena, and it seems to be definitely blood related. And we also believe too that if a family seems to have a little bit more maybe like psychic abilities, it seems to also follow people that are more sensitive, more psychic, more open to being
Yes,
contacted.
we think that's one of their criteria of judgment
yes, it
as
seems
well.
to be that too.
and
Certainly
you
in
have a
Stephen's
theory
family's case and a few other, and other people we've talked to.
right. And you have a theory, and the theory is in your book, and that's actually really, really compelling. So guys, you have to check out their book, and I'll put the link in my bio or in the show notes so that way you guys can check out this book. It's amazing. So
Thanks.
my question was, how does this connect with like the other theories, like the Anunnaki theory, like all these other like alien theories that we have?
Well, the one of the most important pieces of evidence that we discovered was the Hiawatha asteroid impact crater was discovered in 2016. Our theory is that prior to the Hiawatha asteroid impact, that was 13,000 years ago, that the human race had become very advanced. And the stories about, for instance, Atlantis, that it was a very advanced city, technologically advanced city. And, the human race, Homo sapiens sapien, we've been on the planet for 120,000 years. But mainstream archaeology would have us believe that we just sat around for 107,000 years doing nothing, making no advancements at all, when suddenly 13,000 years ago we decided to get smarter and start inventing things like the house, a place to live,
Literally makes no
wheel.
not be
sense.
in the caves,
Yeah, it
And
makes no sense.
it makes no
whatsoever.
sense. The human race, whatever else you want to say about us, we're an industrious, creative, intelligent people.
Curious, yes.
Yeah,
Restless.
so I doubt we would sit stagnant for so long. And so we believe that the Hiawatha asteroid impact is quite devastating. It wiped out the woolly mammoth and the mastodon and the saber-toothed cat and the dire wolf.
The Clovis people.
The Clovis people of North America disappeared. A bunch of other animals too, the American camel, the American horse, our plains animals.
The Hiawatha, by the way, just to jump in, was found in northern Greenland
Yes.
because the ice sheets have been, receding, as we know, and so it was finally found. We surmise that because of Leslie will fill in about the Younger Dryas and all that.
Yes, there were layers of soil from that era. The Uccello horizon is a layer of charcoal found on 10 different countries and 4 different continents. And it shows that the forests of all these continents were on fire at the same time.
Yes.
And laid down this layer of charcoal. And then right after that is a layer of soil called the Younger Dryas boundary, which shows 1,100 years of drastic climatic chaos and, what would happen after an asteroid impact.
We were coming out of an ice age. We were shoved back into an ice age.
Yes.
Basically.
It turned us right around and shoved us back in for another 1,100 years. So it was quite the devastation. It would have caused 2,000-foot high tsunamis worldwide. And we think this is the actual source of the Great Flood. And then finally, all these flood myths in our ancient lore make sense. And we think that our highly advanced cousins escaped. Some of them escaped the devastation into space because we had a space program back then. I think we were putting the bases on Mars and the base on the other side of the moon, and there's a few other bases in our solar system that we believe were attributed to ourselves prior to Hiawatha. And then Hiawatha struck, but before that, they were warned. Everyone on all these flood myths have the same message. It's like,
Every single one.
yeah, that God warned us that there's going to be a terrible flood and said, you'd better build an ark or climb to very high ground or dig in underneath a city underneath the ground.
Like in Turkey.
So this points to us having foreknowledge of the incident, like we would find now. If we could spot asteroids coming at us now, giving us about a year and a half's notice, then this was enough time enough for them to prepare. And I don't know if your readers have all heard or seen the movie Deep Impact, where they plan to go underground and build these underground arcs to survive an asteroid impact. We think that is precisely what happened. Rather than let their entire race be destroyed, we think they dug into deep underground bunkers and also, to a certain extent, were able to escape into space. And we think that that caused a separation between the two, peoples of humanity. The ones that went underground kept their knowledge and kept their technology, and the ones that escaped into space the same. But all of us on the surface, we were thrown back into the Stone Age by the cataclysm. We would have been lucky to survive it. In fact, we know of a population bottleneck in our genetic. If you look at our genetic history, it shows us as being a very diverse race for very long time, and then it narrows to where our population was possibly around 10,000 individuals. And our entire race has regenerated from those 10,000 individuals. So we are actually not a very genetically diverse race anymore because of that. And what could cause that? And of course, we now know what it was. It was and once the crater was discovered, it really snicked our theories into place about what. And this makes so much sense.
And one thing that Leslie forgot to mention is that there were nanodiamonds found in
Yes.
that 1-inch layer of charcoal, and those are only created by a celestial body coming through the Earth's atmosphere like about 40,000 miles an hour, creating these nanodiamonds.
The dust around around the asteroid
corona.
or meteor superheats coming through the atmosphere, and it forms these little tiny microscopic round diamonds called nanodiamonds, and they were found in high concentration in the soil. And we found that out about 25 years ago.
Yes.
And so we knew that there was some celestial impact at that time, but we just couldn't find the crater because it was hiding under the ice sheet. But in 2017 it was discovered finally, and we now know that it was a good size asteroid. The crater itself is the same size as Washington, D.C. So
Wow.
it's a big crater, and
Yeah.
it would have dumped supposedly 1,500 gigatons of ice would have immediately been vaporized, and a gigaton is 1 billion metric tons.
Yes.
So 1,500 of those would have been vaporized instantly and covered half the Earth in clouds within moments, and
that
sent these tsunamis worldwide.
That tracks with a different theory that I ran across when I was doing research for the pyramids, was that the Ice Age ended instantly, was the theory I found.
Yes.
And I was like, that's crazy. Like, how would the Ice Age end instantly? But this, makes total sense that this is why, in that the tsunamis that you were talking about would be the flood. Because you're right. In every single ancient text, there's some major flood event.
Yep.
And we have
one of them.
Evidence
in
of
fact,
that all over the world.
Yes.
Right. We go back to 1799 when I was about maybe 15 or 10 years old, whatever. There was books out about how mammoths were still being found in Siberia. They dug up one that was upright, that was completely intact, that was in a block of ice.
And it still had food in its mouth,
Right.
like it died mid-chew.
Yeah, the 90-foot fruit trees that still had fruit on them,
And
which
that's very telling, actually,
very
because
telling.
when a fruit crop is exposed to frost, an early frost or unseasonable frost, what it does is it drops the crop. It drops the fruit off the tree, and so that the tree can survive it abandons its crop. But that didn't happen. The fruit is actually frozen onto the trees. That means it was flash frozen quickly.
Right.
And now we know why. Now we know how. And
And we know that Siberia also was a more temperate zone. They used to have
right,
crocodiles and camels and much more diverse
rhinos.
rhinos.
Mhm.
Exactly. So,
Wow.
so we know that there was a dramatic, drastic, and very, very fast change in climate.
We think it may have actually caused a lithospheric shift at the same time. Do you know about that theory,
I was
Hapgood's
gonna
theory of the lithospheric shift?
I was gonna ask you to explain it a little bit more for everybody listening.
Okay, this scientist surmised that because the planet has a thin, hard crust on the outside, but is liquid on the inside, that it's possible for this crust to shift.
He called it crustal displacement.
Crustal displacement. And so, what there's a few things that can do it. I believe one of the things that can do it is a large buildup of ice at the poles causes the planet to start wobbling funny, and it can shift and put those ice sheets lower in and where they can melt, to a certain extent, and the planet will restabilize. But also, what I think can cause it is a big asteroid punching us hard in the face, and we think that the lithospheric shift did happen because Hapgood puts the last one as being between 12 and 18,000 years ago. And the Hiawatha asteroid impact was 13,000 years ago, so it falls right inside that window.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that would also explain the devastation, because if the crustal displacement occurred at the same time as the impact, it would have just add to the cataclysm.
And Albert Einstein was a proponent of his theories.
theory.
Professor Hapgood, I forget what.
And he wrote the
University.
foreword for his book.
He wrote the
actually.
foreword for one of his books. Yes.
So Hapgood, if you want to look it up, that information's out there. But anyway, so we believe that Hapgood is correct and that a lithospheric shift did take place. And whatever advancements we had made up to that point would have just been scraped off the surface of the world by this disaster. And we know almost nothing about ourselves prior to 13,000 years. Human history rarely extends beyond the 13,000 year mark.
Right.
In any way.
Apart from like Göbekli Tepe.
Well, actually, that's about after the devastation.
It's
so
around the same time, 12 to 13,000 years ago.
right, we think Göbekli Tepe was the settlement from the cities, the ancient cities of Derinkuyu. These are in Turkey on the high Anatolian plateau, very far from the oceans. So it's at 4,700 feet elevation and about 300 miles from the coast. So we think that, and there's a story in the area of Ahura Mazda. The god Ahura Mazda warned King Yima that he had to build an underground city to protect his people because a winter was coming like no other had ever happened. And we think that the reason he wasn't told to build an ark or a boat or go to high ground was they were on high enough ground as it was. So they were told to dig in underground, build a city that could accommodate 20,000 people and take their animals with them. And we think this is in preparation for the flood and in the case of the return to the ice age quickly. And then quickly out, as you said before. It only lasted another 1,000 years or so. So 1,000 years is a long time.
Did they build that city? Is there evidence of that city?
Oh yes, it goes down 13 stories. It's amazing. The upper two stories were for the animals and for barns. They also found that Derinkuyu is connected via tunnels that go to
other
cities that are like 10 to 20 miles away. And there's this whole network of these underground cities. They had chapels down there. They had the ability to make wine. They had air ventilation. They had sewer systems.
Deep wells.
Engineers,
for water.
yes, engineers look today and they say we couldn't replicate this today. I mean the engineering that went into making sure that the whole thing wasn't going to collapse. And they have these doors, these defensive doors that roll from the inside. So let's say you're being attacked by an enemy, they couldn't open the door.
Right. You can roll it into place and it goes snick into place, and you can roll it back out of place from the inside only, but from the outside you cannot get inside this door.
Amazing, amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, we think so. We think the people from those cities, those underground cities, once the climate had settled down enough to where they could come out of from the underground, we think the Gobekli Tepe's areas is only like 100 miles away, a little bit lower elevation. So we think those people left the underground cities and then settled in the Gobekli Tepe's and the other Tepe areas they're discovering now. We think that's who those people were and ended up being. And we think also some of them may have migrated into Mesopotamia and resettled that area.
So is that what you think the city that is theorized in Antarctica? Do you think that's what that was too?
Yes, I do. We believe Antarctica was also shifted into the South Pole with the lithospheric shift, and it used to be at a more temperate region. And that's why there are existing maps showing some of the coastline of Antarctica with no ice on it.
Yeah, the famous
Right.
Perry Reese map, which
Yeah.
Graham Hancock covered in his Fingerprints of the Gods, which
And I went over
read
that in
about
my
30 years
Antarctica
ago.
episode as well.
Great
Yeah.
book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's who we think is launching the UFOs today. We think that these underground cities and civilizations do exist, and that they are at least 13,000 years ahead of us technologically. And we think that they're launching the UFOs in our skies from these cities. We hear constant reports of people seeing them coming up out of lakes, up out of the ocean, up out of volcanoes, out of the sides of mountains, out of the sides of mesas and ridges. They're coming up out of the ground and
Right.
not down from outer space.
There are countless reports from the Hopi Indians and which other groups besides
Lots.
Hopis?
Gosh, everybody.
Yeah, the American Indians they're replete with different sightings. They call them their star brothers or star friends, or they call them the Anunnaki or the ant people, and they have a completely different psychological viewpoint. As far as going back into their lore about what these entities are. They kind of seem as brothers. They call them brothers, so
Hmm.
they're not looking at them as being something that's different than human at all.
And when I look at a gray alien, or I mean, not physically, but when I
Right.
see drawings of them or listen to reports, what I'm hearing is that these are very close to us in physical form. So much so that, the Lonnie Zamora sighting, it's a famous one, that he saw two aliens outside of their spaceship, and once they saw him, they ran into the spaceship and took off. But he described them as working on their spaceship, and they looked like large children or very small adults. And that's what he thought they were until he got closer and realized that their eyes are too large and their head is slightly too large. And that's about when they noticed him and ran off.
Yeah,
So
he was a highway patrolman, or he was
a cop. Yeah,
he was a cop.
sergeant.
This was April 24th, 1964, in Socorro.
So my point about him, though, is that if he is mistaking these creatures as human from 50 feet away, it's because they're moving like humans. And if they're moving like humans, it's because they have the same skeletal structure and the same musculature as humans. And again, we hear about the aliens, but they're human. Like the Nordic aliens are indistinguishable from human beings. They look like tall Swedes, very, very blonde, blue-eyed Swedes. And then there was the incident at the White House with Valiant Thor. This was an interesting phenomenon. This person landed in a spaceship in a Virginia field and demanded to be taken to their leaders, so to speak. And he spent 3 years at the Pentagon and the White House giving advice. But this person is a Caucasian, red-haired man who claimed to be from Venus.
And we're
Now
actually
we
covering
know.
that next week on on this show too.
Oh,
Yeah.
are
Yes,
you?
yes, you said that. Yes,
Oh
I
well, maybe we
remember.
shouldn't spoil it
No,
for
that's
people.
okay.
But
No, tell us about it because then they'll get like a little
okay,
There's
taste.
only one picture that we've ever seen that apparently is supposedly Valiant Thor.
he looks like a man, like a guy.
Caucasian man with blackish reddish hair, and this looks like a somebody like almost like a Richard Gere type of face kind of thing, or Alec Baldwin when he was younger, kind of fairly good looking, but
Hmm.
obviously very
Still a
Caucasian,
human.
and he was advising Eisenhower,
And the
and
Pentagon, yeah.
yes,
So this man, he claimed to be from Venus, and now we know for a fact that Venus is not capable of sustaining life as we know it. So we know that he's lying about where he's coming from. And for years, these beings under the ground, they've played God to the barbarians, savages that we became after the devastation knocked us back into the Stone Age. And there's all these stories in the flood myths too about how, okay, the flood came, we were almost wiped out, a few survivors, and we became barbarians, and then we are visited by God. God comes and reteaches us how to be civilized again. The Viracocha myth, or stories rather, the Kukulkan, and well, there's just hundreds of them in these.
Huang Di, the old emperor,
Yeah,
Ahura
they're
Mazda.
where we're barbarians. They come and they took pity on us. I think they just also we might have become a problem for them. Where we think they need us, which is why they're taking our genetic material. And the reason we think they're preying on Caucasians in particular is we think it just happens to be the branch of humanity that they are. When they separated from us 13,000 years ago, we think it just happened to be the Caucasian phenomenon,
Primarily.
and that they are possibly needing surface DNA in these large quantities. We're not entirely sure if it's part of their breeding program, or if it's that they are becoming sterile, living underground. And
Hmm.
in order to continue their race, they need regular infusions of surface person DNA, uh, making their
And
race viable
yes,
again.
in fact, there have been stories like that have been floating around there that the Greys are actually Zeta from Zeta Reticuli, and that they're here because their race is dying, becoming unviable. Well, it makes a heck of a lot more sense that um, if you live underground as a race and you're not getting the vitamin D and other such things, that and you had a smaller population base, that you may actually start to become unviable,
And we
and you
think this,
need you
yeah,
need genetic infusions. Just like it also explains why all the cattle mutilations,
right.
always exsanguinating the cattle, taking the eye, the skyward facing eye, taking the sex organs, the genitals, and
All the
repeatedly.
blood.
And they do this for other domesticated animals too. It's not just it's horses. They do the same thing
Yeah,
too. The
sheep,
goats.
goats.
Yes.
It's mostly domesticated animals, but there's also been heard tell of wild animals taken as well.
Yes. Here and
There's a
there.
bizarre story in Alaska about that, where some campers saw a UFO land in a field. They were up on top of a ridge, and they saw a UFO land in the field and then take off and leave. And the next day, they hiked down to where the landing site was, and they found an enormous pile of animals that had been mutilated this way. And one of the animals was a killer whale, of all things, way inland, and an elk, which is not an indigenous species to Alaska, and a bunch of different wild animals were in this pile as well. So
So like
it's
they were
not
just
just domestic animals.
like they were just discarding them there. Like they had used them, they got what they needed.
Yes,
They were just like getting rid of them there.
That's what they do. They carve out the parts they want, and they leave the carcasses to rot. And this phenomenon was so widespread in the United States in the 70s that the ranchers demanded the government do something about it. And they opened up an FBI investigation and determined that it was predators, which is the world's stupidest conclusion, because these cuts on these animals are surgical precision and cauterized. And it's almost like they have a cauterizing scalpel that cauterizes as it cuts. The circle where the eye is taken in a perfect circle. And the carving around the tongue, they also take the tongue around the face. It's this perfect oval,
And of course
again,
they
cauterized.
and they take all the blood too,
And,
which
yeah, there's no blood at the scene, and there's no footprints around, which would obviously, if there was a predator, there would be animal tracks around.
Right.
And animals, predators, after these creatures are killed, they refuse to touch them. For whatever reason, predators will not touch these carcasses.
Which
And
doesn't
so
normally
it was
happen
such a
because
wide, but it, sorry.
no, that's okay. I was gonna say, like, I have chickens, and sometimes when they die, we just take them to the end of our property and put them down there, and the coyotes will just come and eat them. So
Yeah, happily. Thank you
right,
very much
so
for the donation.
the fact that animals aren't
But
eating
not
them is concerning.
yes, bizarre, to say the least. So we think that perhaps they took, when they went underground, they may have taken herds of domestic animals with them. And possibly, like in the Ark, a story, saved two of everything so that they have genetic models for foxes and deer and elk and killer whales and everything else. And possibly like a seed bank kind of thing full of genetic
yeah,
material.
we're doing the seed bank thing right now as humans, where
Right.
we have seed banks that are buried underground in very very cold regions, for so in case that we lose like amaranth or wheat or whatever,
We have seeds
we have
still.
seeds. We're doing the same thing right now. Oh, the same
Yes.
thing with DNA. We're tinkering around with CRISPR, and we're
Right.
even talking
Yep.
about bringing back the mastodon or the mammoth and even the dodo bird, and we can literally we're just like playing with them. But we think that given human beings, given any type of future, that we would be starting playing with DNA like Tinker Toys, and
Yes.
we certainly believe that what we're seeing is that they have a high mastery of genetics and genomes. We know that they
Right.
had a high mastery of rock. They could melt and fuse rock the ways that we cannot do. They could, it was, and there are other stories too. You go to the Bible or the Mahabharata, where these rocks would either move by themselves or move with the sound of a horn or levitate. Okay, so we know that these things, it wasn't hard for them to do.
Right. Otherwise, why would you build with 200-ton blocks, when you don't have to? But the answer is it's easy to do it that way because they have the
And they,
technology
they
to do
last
it.
forever too, like Sacsayhuaman. That thing will
Yeah.
never be taken out by an earthquake.
I was
And
gonna
people
ask
don't
about.
realize. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was gonna ask about the your guys' theory about like the pyramids and the pyramids being all over the world, not just like the three great pyramids of Giza. We have
Yes.
pyramids
Right.
everywhere. So what do you guys think about that?
Well, we are very interested in Dr. Carlotto's. I think it's Dr. Mark Carlotto. He's a imaging specialist from with satellite data and satellite imagery. He's an expert at reading it, and
He's written several books
and
too.
he's got several books on this subject. Uh, a lot of these megalithic sites don't quite line up perfectly with the cardinal points, but they're close, but don't quite line up perfectly. And what he did was extrapolate, well, what if they were lined up with a pole at the time? And sure enough, all of the pyramids in Mexico, all the pyramid city sites in Mexico, when extrapolated up along the cardinal points of the structures, they line up exactly where the pole used to be when it was in the East Hudson Bay, which is the prior position of the
Of
pole
the magnetic pole.
prior to Hiawatha. So we think a lot of these cities and structures existed prior to the lithospheric shift of 13,000 years ago. So whether the current structure on top of the foundation is new or not, the foundations of these structures used to line up to the poles of 12,000 years ago, and then some of the structures like Baalbek and the Wall of Jerusalem, they line up to where the poles were 50,000 years ago. So through Carlotto's work, we've come to believe that these structures are much, much, much older than previously thought, and can be. We think they are attributed to us prior to Hiawatha, when we had higher technology, when we had the ability to move these things easily.
We were using them as communication devices, as power generating plants.
Yeah, we subscribe to that theory.
That's pretty much been established.
The Christopher Dunn book, the Pyramid Power Plant, we subscribe to his theory that pyramids are set up as power plants. So when they go to a new area, like in the Americas, say 50,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago, however long, they would build a pyramid first, and that would be their power plant, and then from the power plant they would be able to continue with the rest of their projects there.
Probably a multitude of different uses too. When you think about it, it would have a multitude of different uses.
And all over the world. And we see UFOs perched right above a lot of these pyramids. It seems like, I think it's almost like they're gassing up, like they're still able to pull some sort of power out of these things, and that's why they're hovering over them, like they're charging their batteries and then shooting off away again at
That makes
20,000
sense. Yeah,
miles an
I mean,
hour.
especially if they're power generators, then it makes sense.
We know from a lot of them are built with quartz crystal, as far as it being prevalent inside the rock that they're built with.
Yes.
And we know when quartz is put under weight, it adds to the
The
piezoelectric effect of that rock. So we think they're literally able to charge from existing pyramids, even though they're not fully functioning as power plants any longer.
That
And
makes
they're all
sense.
over the world. And it looks
They
like
are.
the same hand built them, you know?
Were they
And
very
we know very
similar?
little about like ourselves before. Sorry?
No, all the pyramids
What'd you
are all
say?
very similar to like each other.
I
They're a
know.
little bit different. There's a little bit of variation, but like not that much.
Sometimes it's just because the rock is different where they're building, you know? The rock,
Exactly.
their materials change, but their style of megalithic architecture hardly ever does.
The ratio between the base to the height will be different. For instance, like was it Chichen Itza? Is that the big one, or the Teotihuacan?
Teotihuacan. The
Teotihuacan
Pyramid of the Sun
is actually bigger as far as the surface area than the Great Pyramid at Cheops, but it's just because it's wider at the base, and it's relative. There are stones inside the Great Pyramid that are hardness 9 on the Mohs scale, that have filigree hieroglyphic writings that we could only do today if we're using super high powered water jets or
water
lasers.
jet cutters or laser
So
cutters, yeah.
There are a lot of things, and the way these things were designed, even today they're saying it's the most perfect machine designed by man, or that has ever existed. It's the most perfectly on the cardinal points. It's actually like at the center, like in Hancock's book. I think it was in Hancock's book. Yeah, he talked about how if you take this factor and this factor, it's actually at the exact center of the total landmass of the Earth. It's just these, it's like 1/360,000th the radius of the Earth. There are all these different factors in there.
So many different things
that are
you'd
just not mathematically impossible to be just a coincidence.
The more you read about the Great Pyramid, the more it blows your mind. The rose quartz that line the Grand Gallery comes from 600 miles away, and it's cut to machine precision. And these people that it's being attributed to, there's no way. These people were copper tool wielders. That's not even as hard as bronze, and even bronze, you could take a bronze tool and whack rose quartz with it all day and just ruin the tool. It won't cut it, it won't mold it, and especially to these perfect dimensions.
Well, you're telling us we can't do this now,
actually, I agree.
and they were doing it then?
Yeah, we can't do it now, not without crane marks.
No.
Yeah. And Zechariah Sitchin, in his book, The 12th Planet, makes a very compelling case for the fact of the Great Pyramid already existing 6,000 years ago. I recommend reading it, and he convinced me. And it makes me believe that the pyramid structures are much, much, much older than previously thought. But we do believe that it was these were constructed after the Hiawatha asteroid impact, because the Great Pyramid, the whole complex does align to the cardinal points, perfectly so, in fact.
But my question here is the Sphinx has evidence of like water erosion around it. So would the Sphinx
Yes.
have
Yes.
been before the impact and then the pyramids after?
We the Dr. Schock, he's a geologist, is the one that discovered this phenomenon of, it looks like he's convinced it's ancient water erosion. So we believe that it did exist, certainly while there was a much wetter climate. And that would have lasted for 1100 years after the impact. So it could have been right after the impact, maybe right after the Younger Dryas boundary, 1,000 years after the impact. That maybe that's when they constructed the entire
that's
site.
something we're not sure on because
Okay.
of the Aswan Dam and changing the flooding of the Nile, that it would have had, number one, thousands and thousands of years ago, it would have been a completely different climate.
Different climate,
In
yeah.
fact, even their
Right.
building, even their time of building, if they were to build, would be diminished because they couldn't build 24/7 because of the rainy season, because of the flooding. So,
Yeah.
so we're not really sure on the Sphinx, but we do know, like, first John Anthony West was the first guy to point out that this is not wind, this is water erosion,
And then Schock and he worked
Schock
together on
confirmed it,
their
yes.
creating their theory about
Yes.
how old the Sphinx may be. And there's also the inventory stele. Between the paws of the Sphinx, there's a stele there that talks about the pyramids already existing during the time of Khufu. So it couldn't have been being built for Khufu, as
Right.
Right.
mainstream archaeology
That's pretty much
continues
been,
to
that's
insist.
been debunked. Yeah, it's been
So-
pretty much debunked.
Well, I mean, mainstream archaeology is still saying it,
No, they're
but
still holding on to it.
But they're still calling them tombs. They're not tombs.
There's
they were
never been
never
anything-
tombs.
no.
Ever.
Mm-mm.
No.
Egyptians of that era were terrified of grave robbers. They used to bury themselves in hidden, chambers and hidden tombs. And burying yourself in a pyramid would be the opposite of that. That would be the most conspicuous building in the world.
It would be like putting a neon sign saying "Eat at Joe's." Eat at Joe's. It's like this,
Ridiculous.
They get it here. They didn't do that.
Oh dear, but no, they still doggedly say it. And I tell you, when we're watching a program about the ancient, pyramids or something, as soon as they say, "Oh, they were tombs
Built during the time of
for
Khufu,"
then we just change channels, because it's
Yeah,
like,
it's
no.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I have one last question for you guys before we have to sign off here. So recently they have released that there were alien corpses from Mexico, right? And they're like coming out, they're like, UFOs are real. Obviously, we have known this for years, and like plenty of people know.
Right. It's
Um,
not
so
news to us, yeah.
why all of a sudden do you feel that they're like coming out and they're releasing that they have corpses and that they're releasing all these things and like talking about it now?
Well,
that's pretty easy,
It's
really.
such a new discovery that we'd like to see more data on it before.
Well, we think that they're coming forward because everybody has a camera on their hip.
Yeah.
People are just, and also people are getting more sophisticated, and the whistleblowers come forward, and and people really like to believe conspiracy theories, whether they're
Us
correct
included.
or not. It's like we're very prone to being fooled, but we can't be fooled all the time.
Right.
And there are people out there that actually are putting two and two together that makes four, but there's a lot of people that are doing two and two and coming up with seven. A lot of rabbit hole stuff down there, unfortunately, that really makes no sense.
One thing I like about our theories, especially like about them, is that no theoretical physics is required for our theories. You don't need wormholes to really exist. You don't need faster than light travel to really exist. You don't need interdimensional travel to really exist. And you don't need time travel to really exist. Our theories are good old rocketry, good old nuclear power, local a local phenomenon to our solar system. So they're traveling all around our solar system, but we don't think they're traveling interstellar distances. And because these theories, Einstein was saying it's impossible to travel at faster than light speed. And sure, he could be wrong, and maybe a much more advanced race than us might someday come up with a way of doing it that we just haven't thought of. But we still think that our theories, because they don't require any of these rabbit hole theories. Sorry.
No, that's
Well,
okay.
the other thing, you got to look at their actions. Actions always speak louder than words.
Oh, absolutely.
Why would they be so interested in our DNA, in abducting families for over 3 generations, abducting our cows? It's not research and development. They are further ahead of us than we are, but they still need us.
And why
okay?
would they be terrified of our nukes unless they had skin in the game?
Yep.
Right.
Because in this case, our theories show their butts are on the line too if we blow up the planet.
Yeah.
That makes
exactly.
sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no more surface DNA.
Watch what they do. Watch what they do, not what they say.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Stephen and Leslie, for coming on The Rabbit Hole. I really appreciate it. First guests ever, so congratulations and thank you for being my first
Yay.
guest. I really appreciate
Bye, everybody out there.
that.
Thank you.
Until next week, my friends, I know this is a special episode, but we're still going to have a regular episode next week, so don't you worry about that. Stay skeptical, and we will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.